Hey guys, welcome back. A ton of brand new polling data to run through in today's video. We got 11 brand new polls that have been released so far today, 5 of them coming from the state of Michigan, also a brand new national poll, and state-specific results out of Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Illinois. So I want to start here with the national numbers that were posted from CNN, 540 registered voters, and this was taken between the dates of March 4th through the 7th. It's important to note that Elizabeth Warren was an option on March 4, but then she stepped out of the race and was no longer an option from that point going forward. So in this instance, she was in third place, bringing in 7%. And if you just think about it based on policy, you would think that these Warren voters would more likely go to Sanders than Biden, but that's not necessarily how these things always play out. We can see that Joe Biden leading the pack at 52%, and Sanders there in second place at 36 percentage points. Now, the next 5 polls all coming out of the state of Michigan. This first one is from EPIC-MRA, a sample size of 400 likely voters, and we can see that Biden is absolutely crushing it here in his matchup with Bernie Sanders. He's at 51%, with Sanders, who's at 27%. And we're going to see this throughout all of these Michigan polls where Biden has a pretty sizable lead. It is also worth noting that Bernie Sanders had about a 20 percentage point gap between himself and Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And of course, a lot of you are going to remember that Sanders actually went on to defeat Hillary Clinton in Michigan. Now, I think that that's not necessarily what's going to happen here in 2020, especially with Joe Biden showing that he's performing a bit better with these white working class voters than what Clinton was able to do in a lot of these key states where Sanders was more competitive. We'll see how all that plays out tomorrow as Michigan has their election. But moving on to the next Michigan poll, we have this one from Monmouth University, a sample size of 411 likely voters. This one is a little bit more competitive than the prior poll that we just took a look at, but still a significant gap nonetheless, with Biden at 51%, Bernie Sanders in second place at 36 percentage points. The next poll out of Michigan comes from Concord Public Opinion Partners, a sample size of 305 likely voters, and Biden crushing it here. He's at 53%, with Bernie Sanders 30 points back at just 23 percentage points. And then the next Michigan poll coming from Target Insights, a sample size of 600 likely voters, and Biden running away with this one where he's at 65%, followed by Bernie Sanders, who is at 24 percentage points. So around a 40 percentage point lead in that Michigan poll. We can see this data kind of all over the place, with Biden somewhere between about a teens lead all the way to up to about 40 percentage point lead. So we'll see what actually happens on election day, how convincing of a victory that Biden potentially picks up in Michigan, or if it's a bit more competitive, and just how accurate or inaccurate the Michigan polls end up being this time around in contrast to how off they were back in 2016. So then we have 3 polls out of YouGov coming from the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and we can see this Michigan result is actually a little bit more competitive, where we have Biden here at 54% and Sanders at 42 percentage points. Then in Pennsylvania, where you'd expect probably out of these 3 key states, Biden to have a little bit more success potentially against Sanders, given his ties to the state of Pennsylvania. Also, the fact that it is a closed primary. He was at 59% compared to Sanders at 31%. And then the state of Wisconsin, where it's a little bit more competitive, where you have Joe Biden at 49%, Bernie Sanders at 38%. So now moving over to the state of Arizona, this is from OH Predictive Insights, a sample size of 398 likely voters. In the state of Arizona, we can see that Joe Biden is out there in a commanding lead at 45%, followed by Bernie Sanders, who's at 17%. There's a lot of older voters in Arizona, which is probably going to help Joe Biden. There's also a certain amount of Hispanic Latino voters, which one would figure to help Bernie Sanders. We'll see how Arizona ends up playing out here. It's not one of the states that's coming up here on March 10th, though. Those would be the states of Michigan, Missouri, North Dakota, Idaho, Washington, as well as Mississippi. But it is holding their contest in the month of March. And then we can see they also pulled Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg, who are no longer in the race. The next poll coming out of the state of Florida, where Joe Biden is expected to do quite well for himself. A pretty significant sample size here of 3,376 likely voters, with Joe Biden leading the pack at 55%, followed by Bernie Sanders, who's at 29%, and then not really worth touching on the rest of the candidates who are in lower single digits and no longer in this race. And then the last poll to touch on here, coming out of the state of Illinois from Ogden and Fry, a sample size of 457 likely voters in another very commanding position for Joe Biden, where he's up there at around 55 percentage points, with Sanders at around 26%. And then when they gave undecided as not an option, you have Biden going up to 64%, with Sanders there around 32 percentage points. So out of all these polls that I just ran through, a lot of very positive signs here from Joe Biden, and probably not a big surprise considering what happened on Super Tuesday. Joe Biden able to recapture that front runner status. There's a lot more confidence now in him from the voters that had gone away from him after his weak performances in Iowa and New Hampshire. There was a question of how electable Joe Biden was going to be, just given how weak he performed in those early states. But then he was able to reclaim that momentum after South Carolina. He brought that into Super Tuesday, getting a lot of key endorsements running up to that from Beto O'Rourke, as well as Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg. Had some really strong performances there on Super Tuesday, and now he's trying to carry that through to these next upcoming contests that we have. So that's going to wrap this one up. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing if you have not already done so to continue to get updates throughout this election process. And I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.